Alright, this is the presentation of research for the alternative learning environments by Vanessa Zeman. Well, welcome to my summation for our final of the class. I am currently an elementary school teacher, so the majority of my research was focused on environmental aspects of classrooms for elementary age students. The first question we will examine is, does the environment component of the learning environment affect the learning? To answer, we'll look at how the setup of a classroom can affect the students within it. Most of us have heard of feng shui, the balance within a room affecting the balance of those who inhabit it. Well, for one teacher, it was time to restore some balance. One particular year, she had a unique blend of personalities. That is to say, the rates of undesirable behaviors were skyrocketing and taking over her class. Instead of wasting instructional time focusing on discipline, which to that point hadn't been all that effective anyhow, she focused on the physical components of the learning environment she had created. It's human nature to be irritable by elements of congestion, loud noise, and temperature. Knowing this, the focus became lowering the number of distractions and congestion within the room while increasing the comfort and convenience. By focusing on these elements of environment, the teacher was able to make a drastic change in the behaviors of her students. Her classroom management was established through the restructuring of the environment. Inappropriate behaviors dramatically dropped off from 90 to approximately 40%, a more than half the rate decrease, and more importantly, her engagement level soared from a meager 3% to 45%. The concept of learning environment alterations is important because it seems to have an overall effect on the learners. The levels of student engagement and thereby the active learning experience, the real goal of student-centered classrooms, can be achieved by adapting the environment to the needs of the students. Through this, they are provided as support for their learning and an example of how to establish a conducive learning setup for themselves of what is most effective when they are attempt to learn outside of the classroom. Moral of the story: balance within the learning environment creates balance within the learners. Next, we will look at intrinsic motivation learning by asking, what is the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? How does that difference relate to the classroom? First off, let's establish an understanding of the difference. Intrinsic motivation comes from performing an activity because you gain personal satisfaction or a sense of accomplishment from it. Basically, you do it because you want to, plain and simple. An example would be exercising. You feel motivated to exercise because you like it and it makes you feel good mentally and physically. External motivation deals with factors beyond yourself influencing your behavior. You exert a behavior because of the consequences the actions incur. Now, consequences can be good or bad. In our exercising example, choosing to exercise because of an external motivator may be because a personal trainer is holding you accountable, or because you promised yourself a new wardrobe if you hit a weight loss goal. The reason these two types of motivation are important is because of the concept of self-determination. Self-determination is what ultimately determines the difference between the two types of motivations, but in classroom it decides levels of engagement, a main component of active learning. To make the shift, environmental factors including goal setting, conformity effects, and teacher provocation can stimulate a shift towards intentional learning, consequently facilitating self-determination. Metacognition and reflection, common practices within personal goal setting as students establish where they would like their learning to be, measure their current status, and monitor their progress, all the while building their understanding of what knowledge they possess, how to gain more, and growing their investment in the learning process itself. These practices are those of lifelong learners. By making these changes, students can be supported as they improve their skills in classrooms and beyond in their future endeavors. These practices can ultimately shift their motivation in regards to learning so that they achieve that golden state of self-determined intrinsic motivation and lifelong learner status. Next, we ask, what does the introduction of a token reward system or digital badge acquisition do to the classroom environment? Another influencer for motivation is digital badges and points with classroom token systems. Understanding motivation and finding ways to facilitate it in the classroom is important for aspiring students to engage in their studies and encourage them to persevere. Digital point systems acquire badges are an easy way to keep track of efforts by students, teachers, and parents on an up-to-date basis without interrupting class proceedings. These systems also instill accountability for one's own behavior, a valuable lifelong lesson. Students are able to relate to the concept of consequence as their efforts are displayed in a real-time relatable platform. Finally, let's look at the effect of brain connectivity in children who read books and those who spend time exposed to screen-based media. Our final question is, what impact does screen-based media have on brain development in school-age children in terms of reading and language skills? The brains of students aged 8 to 12 years old were measured through fMRI scans for imaging of activated centers within the brain when written materials and verbal words were presented to the children. While the control group utilized more tangible reading resources like books, magazines, and newspapers, the test group utilized screens like smartphones, tablets, and laptops for media interaction multiple times a week. Results showed students who engaged in higher screen time averages had slower brain responses in fewer centers of the brain, and most that occurred were not in the children's language centers. Ultimately, the results concluded that screen-based media had a negative effect on the language development areas of the brains of children when compared to those who engage in tangible reading activities. This topic demands further consideration since there is currently a major push for technology integration within classrooms, which can ultimately affect not only the learning experience of children, but how their brains develop overall. Now, let's recap. The first place to start when creating a learning environment is the environment itself. By creating a space which considers comfort and convenience while eliminating congestion and distractions, the learning environment becomes customized to the needs of the students and will help them prosper. Next, motivation is key. The long-term goal is to facilitate self-determination, influenced intrinsic motivation to establish lifelong learnership. An immediate way to start the process is to use environmental factors like goal-setting records and classroom management systems, which utilize token reward systems so students can track their efforts and build their practices as they shift motivational mindsets. Lastly, we examine technology integration. Technology overall is a major asset for learning. However, consideration of how and when to use technology must be made to determine what platform will be best for the learning experience and overall well-being of the students. All right. Class dismissed.